Welcome in this digitale raam, this digital room of the German Prevention Days. You're actually in the digital room that has the RAN community of practitioners, the RAN practitioners invading or being invited into the German Prevention Days. My name is Steven Lenos. I work with the staff of the RAN practitioners community. I prefer to call it the community because it's excellent individuals, actually. For the next, well, let's say 75 minutes, we will be hosting a session here on an important topic. It's the topic that we all know because Usman Khan, who was the poster boy of a resocialization program in the UK, was on a meeting being a former terrorist extremist, and he attacked people and killed people on the Tower Bridge in London. We have this meeting because in Belgium, for instance, there was a prisoner where there were guards who were concerned about him, and there were some signals that he might be up to something not good. But despite that, he was on leave and he killed a couple of people and 2 police officers, or 1 person and 2 police officers. Benjamin Herman, for instance. So the RAN, the Radicalization Awareness Network, the practitioners part of the RAN, feels the obligation and the responsibility to prevent people who are in custody, who are in prison, to prevent them to make the mistake again and reoffend an extremist or terrorist offense again, or even we don't want them to re-engage with extremist networks, even if they don't offend. It's joining these networks, supporting these networks, also something that we would rather not see in our broad alliance of people who are trying to prevent radicalization. In my screen, some technicalities. On the top, there's a clock ticking and a red dot indicating that this webinar is being recorded. This webinar organized by the German Prevention Days will be recorded, is being recorded, and will be published afterwards. That said, the talking heads and the PowerPoints will be recorded and shared in the chat. The things you put in the chat will not be recorded. So only our talking heads and PowerPoint will be recorded and shared afterwards. The participant list will not be shared, and the chat will neither. So feel free to participate, and nobody will know what you said, what you did in this meeting, except for the people who agreed to be here, being Susanna Papp, and Robert Orell, and Ole Stakenberg, who I will introduce a little longer in a couple of seconds. Let me see if I forgot something else. Lawrence, thank you, Lawrence, showed you where you can post questions, and please post questions. We've been struggling with this digital Corona world now for more than a year, and the lesson I learned is we should try and do as we should do in a normal room. So I definitely invite you to ask questions and try to stir things a little bit up. The better you participate from the chat in this way, the better. The more questions, the better questions you ask, the more criticism or recommendations you post, the better the meeting will become. When we're turning over to the Q&A, we're even able to unmute your microphone, so you can even raise your voice and express what you want to say. But for now, please post your questions in the chat. Let me see if I'm forgetting anything else. The topic of reoffending is becoming an important topic, because there are a lot of people in prison at the moment, coming back from Syria, being sentenced for right-wing extremism. There's quite a lot of people in prison for longer and very often for shorter terms sentences. And all of us are sort of concerned that they might do something wrong, something bad, if the inevitable release will occur. And that's why within the RAN we do several events. We had small-scale expert sessions. We had joint working group meetings on this topic to discuss with practitioners how they see the challenges and what they can learn from each other. That's the overall ambition of the RAN. Make sure that practitioners share information, share lessons, share experiences, so we all get better at the things we do. This whole anti-radicalization agenda is a political agenda. And we're trying to serve society. We're trying to prevent and counter the radicalization leading to violent extremism and terrorism. But all these promises made by politicians and policymakers, and all the knowledge that is available through the good work of researchers, academia, and other experts, in the end, should trickle down, should be made operational by people doing real work, in meeting people in rehab programs, in rehabilitation programs, in DRED programs, by encountering with prisoners in prison. There are people, practitioners, practitioners community, who are actually going to make the policy a success. So excellent policy is great. Excellent research is great, but I think all of us should make sure that in the end, the people doing the real work, doing the exit work, prison work, probation work, prevention work, that they are provided with the right tools and equipment and knowledge and support, all the support we can think of, that they can deliver the policy, because that's what this is all about. I'm going to introduce the three people that you will see speaking today. The first is Susanne Papp. She holds a PhD in social psychology. Her research focuses on analyzing conflicts and the use of restorative justice practices, another new hot topic. She has worked as a lecturer and a trainer in communication, conflict management, and restorative justice. And I know her from being in one of the meetings that we organized, several of the meetings that we organized. She participated in the work of the RAN Rehabilitation Working Group. I saw her earlier this year in the meeting on the same topic. And she's a member of the RAN expert pool. Another expert is, of course, welcome, Susanna. The other expert is Robert Durrell. He's an independent expert, an advisor, a trainer with 2 decades of experience in the PCVE and the counterterrorism work, being engaged from Sweden as his base in disengagement, rehabilitation, and the reintegration of violent extremists. Being that long in business means that he definitely also has expertise in right-wing extremism, which is for some a new topic, but I think those who were around a little longer know that a large portion of our legacy is actually funded in the prevention and the DRED of right-wing extremism. Robert is a member of the steering committee of the European Commission's Radicalization Network. And that's the title here, being a co-leader of the Rehabilitation Working Group, as it's being called now. And he's also been one of the leaders of the former RAN Exit Working Group. Rehab, exit, I think those terms make it clear what Robert is doing. Robert was the director of Exit Sweden for 10 years, and he was also program director at Exit USA for 3 years. These strong practitioners and experts from the RAN will share lessons from RAN from the last couple of years, months, and even perhaps decades. Susanna prepared 2 presentations based on the things that the RAN has been doing the last couple of years. She will do some presentations, and then Robert will present one of the examples, one of the projects that we wanted to present today. Katrin Koller from the Austrian NEUSTART program wanted to present her program, but actually today she has some medical urgencies which forbid her maybe not able for her to join us, unfortunately. So Robert will tell a little bit about her project. Then we will do a short break, and then Robert is gonna interview Ole Stagerberg. And I think I'll do the longer introduction of Ole from Norway, the Norwegian University of Correctional Services, the prison world, we would say. He knows a lot about dynamic security. Robert is going to engage in an interview and a conversation with Owen about dynamic security and how that could help those who are working in countering, preventing, and found extremism in achieving their goals. And then Susanna will do the second part of her presentation, another PowerPoint, which I think we will make available to the organizers, so the German Prevention Day can share it with you on the website. I think that's what they do. I've been at the German Prevention Days a couple of times, and I think they will build a website with a presentation. So if Susanna is okay with it, then we're going to share her PowerPoint afterwards. I think that's more or less it for now. Let me see. Yes, I think it's time to go over to Susanna. Susanna, would you be so kind to share your content?
Thank you, Stephen, and a warm welcome to everyone in the room. Our first session today will focus on, can you hear me? Just super, thank you for the feedback. Our first session today will focus on the prison exit continuum from a re-engagement prevention perspective. Our goal here is to review the processes of rehabilitation and reintegration to identify key issues, topics, also phases that are crucial to prevent terrorist re-engagement. Here we integrated and relied on a couple of sources. Firstly, we integrated practitioners' input, their observations and experiences of current challenges and practices that they shared at a joint RANT working group meeting that focused on the topic of re-engagement. Also, we incorporated expert interviews that we conducted in preparation for the RAN consolidation paper on re-engagement. And I'm happy to share that this paper is in the final phases of the production and will be published soon. And we will also rely in this presentation on research articles and data to get a fuller picture. We will use as a starting point the 7 phases of the rehabilitation process identified by the RAN rehabilitation manual. You can see the phases here also listed here on the slide, and each of the 7 phases identifies core rehabilitation tasks, and they describe in detail which professions, which institutions, and which parts of the social environment are involved and collaborate. Although the first 2 phases, the pre-trial detention and the acceptance of the new reality posed by the prison sentence are very important, but today we will focus on phase number 3 and onward. We will have a special attention on phase 3, serving the prison sentence, where ideally the rehabilitation also begins. And we will have a special focus on release preparation, as well as the reintegration phase. Challenges identified by practitioners, and as well as best or inspiring practices. Moving on to our program today, you can see the outline, and we will have 4 main foci today. The first one is what recidivism data tell us in relation to the nature of recidivism. We will focus on Europe mostly. The second point, we will discuss new trends and new challenges that have emerged and that are identified by researchers as well as practitioners. And in the third point, I would like to discuss a couple of experiences that practitioners shared and reported as key issues and challenges. The last point deals with transition management, that we have to have a special focus on this phase and the challenges it poses. After each of the points, we will share recommendations for practitioners. So now we can begin, moving on to our first content slide. So what can we learn from terrorist recidivism data today? You can see it on the figure that compared to regular criminal recidivism as well as gang recidivism, terrorist recidivism is very low. This figure shows worldwide data, and it also corresponds to European samples, that it is between 0 to 10%. European samples show between 2 to 7% of the prisoner population reoffending. This tells us, and also researchers have an unanimous conclusion based on this, that prison seems to work for this population, and maybe contrary to most popular beliefs, most of released terrorist offenders do actually disengage from violent extremism after they serve their sentence. A short but important note on the use of terminology. Here I cited recidivism data. This is measured by the reconviction of terrorist offenders. So it means that they reappear in the criminal justice system after they committed a terrorism-related crime. However, in practice and with practitioners, we also like to have a broader focus. So we talk about re-engagement, and by this we mean that any form of return to terrorist activism or to an extremist group would be considered re-engagement, independent of whether or not the person's activity have been recorded in the criminal justice system. And of course, the data is hopeful, and it maybe gives us a peace of mind. But we all know also, Stephen mentioned well-known cases of reoffenses, where we know that when reoffending happens, then it usually has a very high impact, and it leads to tragic consequences. So it is very important to focus on it, to investigate, and to understand what lessons we can learn from it. But I would like to argue that there are other issues, other trends and challenges that make terrorist re-engagement very timely, and we can see some of these arguments and trends shown on the next slide. And the first one is that we can see in the past decade a rapid rise in the number of terrorist inmates population in prisons, in European prisons. And we can see that some countries who have not had terrorist offenders before had to develop capacities to deal with them in a very short amount of time. An example of this is Austria, for example, or what we could see also that countries, due to the rise and the rapid rise of the number of terrorist inmates, had to change approaches, how they deal with them in prison, and they changed, for example, the prison regime that they applied, which is the case, for example, with France. But we can see, and the slides also shows this, that currently there's an estimated number of 1,500 inmates convicted for terrorist offenses in 9 Western and Southern European prisons. And there is an estimated additional 1,500 or between 1,500 and 2,500 regular prisoners who are currently monitored for suspicion or vulnerability to radicalization. I know this number is close to 300 regarding Germany. This is a data from 2020. All of these prisoners are to be released in the coming 2 to 5 years. So this also shows that case-by-case management will not be sufficient, and we will need to address these issues, the issues of reintegration on a more systemic level. The second trend can be seen in the diversification in ideology, background, age, gender, and also there is a wider variety of prison sentences regarding their length. Just to mention the main trends that are currently relevant, due to the rise in populism, there is a rise in homegrown right-wing extremist offenders. There is also a considerable amount of returning foreign terrorist fighters, and there is a rise in female violent Islamist offenders. These populations might need specific treatments, and they might have different challenges in their reintegration. So let's move on to some of the recommendations that we can have in order to address these challenges. Just as I mentioned, a systemic addressing of these questions will be very important for a sustainable long-term solution, with the goal to proactively adapt processes of rehabilitation and reintegration. Also, it is very important to have regular knowledge sharing platforms where member states practitioners can meet and share their current observations, challenges, and also inspiring practices. One important conclusion was from the RUN workshop that analyzing reoffense cases was found to be very useful for practitioners in order to understand the complexity of cases. So we also recommend to continue this practice. Moving on to our next point. What we can see from practitioners' experiences is that information sharing and assessment is crucial in successful re-engagement prevention, and false compliance also came up as a very important topic. So we decided to dedicate to these most important key issues a separate section. So we will discuss them more in detail in section 2. But here I would have just liked to share a couple of experiences and observations and lessons learned from practitioners in the field. And you can see that I try to group them based on the four areas of rehabilitation. I won't mention all of them, but it just serves as a guideline for me to remember these cases. Firstly, talking about de-radicalization challenges. Of course, there are a lot of questions regarding this field. Forced compliance, also whether it can be voluntary or involuntary. Right now, I would like to share an experience, an observation from one of the Dutch prisons, where what they have found in common in offenders who successfully reoffended or attempted to reoffend was that all of them actually were convicted on the first place for attempt travel to Syria to join ISIS. And it seemed that they considered their incarceration and arrest as a big failure. And during their time of imprisonment, the ISIS caliphate collapsed. So they felt they had to rectify, and they decided to carry out an attack in the Netherlands instead. So that was an important common element that was found in the Dutch prison. Another thing that has been reported by multiple practitioners was that expulsion or the threat that one could be stripped of their nationality or citizenship could serve as a trigger of an attack carried out of rage. So this also requires special monitoring. Moving on to the area of mental health, we know that psychiatric disorders are not overrepresented in the terrorist population. However, it is important to note that when a mental health issue or condition is undetected and untreated, then it can really undermine reintegration efforts. So it is very important to screen also for mental health problems. Substance abuse is to be considered, as well as, especially in the case of returning foreign fighters, post-traumatic stress disorder is important to consider. And an interesting observation has been reported by a couple of practitioners, and it seems that individuals who are on the autism spectrum may be more vulnerable to online recruitment. And if it goes undetected, then maybe a reintegration plan that requires the individual to go to a formal school system where they are bound to fail would lead to an unsuccessful reintegration. I would jump to the fourth area, which is social integration. And we know that in the time of transition and release plan, one of the key issues is to how we can help the individual to change his or her destructive social bonds with the group, to replace them with pro-social alternatives. One important observation was mentioned by a civil society worker working in a German prison, where he reported that the majority of violent Islamist offenders actually are aware where the closest places of worship is to him. And a lot of the times they report that they are contacted by recruiters, and they are offered housing and shelter after their release. So this is what has to be countered, and this is what has to be worked with to provide and to work together for a healthier alternative. Yes, let's move on to recommendations for the rehabilitation phase. Overall, what we can say is that a shift from risk assessment only would be better to change with a more comprehensive approach that includes, besides assessing risks, also identifying needs that are related to some of the areas that I've just mentioned, and see those needs as opportunities that can be worked with in order to empower the offender, especially because they can be factors that could severely hinder the readjustment. Also, let's have an emphasis on needs and risk management. So let's put the focus on how we deal with the information that we gain from the assessment process. What do we do with it? And let's revisit them from time to time. This is also why we decided to have this as a title of our second session, also showing our commitment to this more holistic approach. And as a second recommendation, we would just like to strengthen what's already well known, how important it is to provide access for help and support for prisoners, and that it has to come from a multi-competent, multidisciplinary team that can deal with mental health issues, that can also provide areas of that can also provide possibilities to discuss religious questions or help the individuals, for example, become a little bit more critical towards these beliefs. So critical thinking. Moving on to our last point, transition management. What recidivism data shows us is that the first year after the release, after the first 9 to 12 months is crucial. This is where the majority of the reoffenses happen. So intensive care and multi-stakeholder collaboration is very important. And for a successful release planning to be successful, trust building needs to take place, and this takes time. So therefore, we can see in our recommendation slides, if we move on, that the early involvement of all relevant stakeholders will be important, and also to allow enough time and space for building rapport between the inmate and the relevant actors. And talking about trust building, the involvement of civil society organizations as independent actors can be extremely valuable. Most of the times they have the specialized expertise in the field of radicalization to carry out DRED or rehab programs. Most organizations also work not only with the offender, but also with family and communities. And I think what I would highlight here is the fact that they can be more accepted by inmates simply because they don't represent authority. So sometimes the building of actual authentic relationship is simply undermined by a situational factor that the probation officer or other actors they actually represent government authorities and this could hinder the rapport building. And my last point here would be what practitioners discuss from time to time, how important it is to shift from project-based fundings to more sustainable resources, so that their work extends throughout the whole 7 phases, and most of the times does not end with the release or the post-release phase. They remain open for contact even after years for released individuals who can rely on them in problem solving. That is a very important protective factor in re-engagement. And to close with our last slide. Oh yes, exactly. So I would like to give the floor to Robert, because we have an excellent inspiring practice in this field. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Susanna, for setting the scene very well. And the case example that we wanted to have here was, as Stephen mentioned earlier, Katrin Koller from NEUSTART, who wasn't able to join. But we at least wanted to mention the organization and just highlight briefly some of the points that they work with to have as an example. NEUSTART is a non-profit organization which is set up to provide probational services in Austria, working with a few different areas such as mediation, electronic home detention, and aftercare services. But what they also offer is something called social net conferences, which is offered in prison to get the chance to develop a mandatory plan for offenders to plan their future release. So client-based, client-oriented interventions. And the offenders work together with the social network to create this plan. And this is sent to the judge, who issues orders according to the plan at the trial. The probation officer services complaint with orders and therefore also implementation of the plan. And the method benefits radical individuals by helping them to develop a strategy and plan covering the daily life, work, housing, and so on. And we know from working with individuals leaving violent extremist groups that empowerment of the individual decision-making is important. They come from very strict, closed groups. So by really putting the client-centered focus, we help them to also develop decision-making in a strong way. Next slide, please. And just some more information on this social networking conferencing. It really builds on involving a range of different partners, both family members, social networks where there's pro-social networks, all ranges of authorities that are needed to help to support the work. The client creates their own plan, which makes it owned by the client, and helps to make the important decisions. It's a shared responsibility, so the partners work together with this, and it really focuses on strengthening family bonds between the client and family. The overall experiences which are reported is the variety of resources and motivation. So motivation is, as we know in this work, very important. So having motivation in center. The participants have influence over their decisions. The more people who are active in the pro-social developments, the better. Helping clients to also build realistic plans, extend social controls through family and friends, and to really help give new perspectives on family and client resources. So we wanted to share this, and we really encourage everybody who listens and who are interested to look up NEUSTART online. There's information in English on the ROUND webpage and in other places where you can read more about them. So we wanted to share this as a good case example. All right, with this, we leave it back to Stephen.
Yeah, thank you, Robert, for well, this improvised stepping in for Frau Katrin Koller, who wanted to be here. Unfortunately, she couldn't. I already shared the link to the collection in the chat, but I think, Susanna and Robert, we could also add another slide to our presentation with a link to the rehab workbook, the rehab manual, and some other interesting documents in other places, which we'll add to the PowerPoint and then we'll give to the organizers. So participants will receive all of this, because we are here because we want to spread the message, spread the news, so we hope that people will do so as well. Are there any questions? Is there anyone who's got a question on these two presentations? The improvised one by Robert Harrell with interesting Austrian project, and Susanna Papp's excellent presentation, capturing a lot of content of the RAN legacy in this. Anyone from the audience? And I see you can just talk and use your microphone, if I'm well informed, to raise a question, or you can just say that you like the presentation or that you didn't like the presentation, but then you have to prove which part wasn't if you're liking. So I'll be silent for a couple of seconds to see who's coming forward. Anyone? Don't be shy. If not, this was quite a long time being silent for me. If nobody is doing this, I don't see any questions in the chat yet. Please feel free. Your experience of the session, your feeling of engagement with the things we're discussing will raise the moment you step into the digital arena and pose a question or a remark. So we'll give you another opportunity shortly. Robert and Susanna, we're going to surprise you with the decision that we won't do another 5-minute break now. We started a little late, so we thought if we just push on, it's late already, we might make a little speed, and this will keep the energy flow a little bit better. So my proposal now is to have Robert interview Ole, and I will introduce Ole while he can turn on his camera. Let me see. Ole Stakerberg is, for me, new to the RAN community of practitioners, but I doubt it will be the last time that we're going to engage with him, because he is from Norway, where the prison correctional staff has this promising approach, so-called dynamic security, that everyone is talking about, and Norway has got the biggest experiencing this. And we think there might be something there. So he and his colleagues who are aware of this dynamic dynamic security approach will be invited more often to our meetings. Let me introduce you properly, Ole, assistant professor and international coordinator at the University College of the Norwegian Correctional Service. You hold a master's degree in public safety and risk management and higher education in pedagogic. For the last 6 years, you've been coordinating projects according to the EEA and Norway grants and coordinating with international cooperation partners. This is also how we stumbled upon you, because the EPTA, the European Network of Training Providers for the Correctional Services, did a European project on dynamic security and issued a very interesting book with best practices of dynamic security, and this is how we found you. Other responsibilities include the prison staff education in security and risk knowledge, course in security, crisis management and risk management for prison staff and management. And you've been walking the prison floors yourself as a prison officer and senior officer in Norwegian prisons for 19 years. And you're already teaching at this Academy for Correctional Staff Officers for 19 years already. So this is more than enough qualification to be invited to a RAN meeting and engage with our other experts. Robert, would you be so kind to see what Mr. Stagerberg has to say? And I'll give you 10, max 15 minutes. So Susanna already knows he only has 15 minutes more to finish at 6 o'clock. So gentlemen, go ahead. And hello, Ole.
Well, thank you very much for that, Stephen, and once again, warm welcome, Ole. We're very happy to have you here to share your rich experience with us in this seminar. And I wanted to start with asking the question, what is a dynamic security approach, and how does it look in practice?
First of all, I would say thank you for the invitation and for the presentation, Stephen. As you said, I'm almost 40 years in the correctional service, and that means that it started when I was 10, I think. So, no, your question, Robert, about what is dynamic security and how we approach it. To explain it very simple, is to the frontline staff to be present with the inmates and interact with inmates and do activities together with inmates. That's the simple way to explain it in our context in Norway. But as you know, this required, of course, staff ratio that Norway maybe is on top of in the world, together maybe with Sweden and Denmark. But that's the main issue in dynamic security, is to be present in the environment where the inmates are.
Perfect. And if we think of dynamic security, how can this help in cases of extremist offender management? How do we see that apply there?
It's the same on how we approach any inmates, and especially this group that are a challenging group for many, and it requires, of course, knowledge. What is kind of inmates which challenges they are proceeding. So the key is knowledge, and the knowledge is gained through interaction. It's that simple and that difficult, I think. And the crucial thing here is to establish environment in the prisons that are safe, also for both for staff and also for the inmates. because first of all, you have to create a safe environment. That doesn't mean that inmate who is considered to have a high risk for violation and so on. Then we have to establish units that can handle this and that are appropriate conducted to handle that kind of prisoners, that have enough staffing to create this kind of some sense of safe environment, because this is crucial to do the next thing, to get to establish a relationship with the prisoners, to communicate with the prisoners, and hopefully gain a positive atmosphere and a positive relationship.
And this sounds, for people who, myself, who work in exit work, this sounds very familiar in the sense that we want to build, we want to build relations with the people that we work with to be able to influence and affect positively. So with this, if we look at dynamic security, how can this specifically help to prevent recidivism?
It's to have a knowledge about the inmates, is to achieve the right measures also, or the right way to meet the prisoner and have an impact on the choices he or she makes. To see the person behind the criminal act or the terrorism act is crucial, I think. This is universal. We know what is not functioning. That's a bad condition. That's bad treatment, and also the distance. So this is universal. We have to try to get closer to the person, to interact with the person, and understand the person, and make the right measurements for the person, I think.
So indeed, understanding the individual and to make individualized adaptations and assessments. When we look at if we shift a bit and look at risk assessment tools, what type of challenges are related to the field when we look at risk assessment tools?
Yeah, first of all, I would say that we have to acknowledge that we can't control everything, and we can't have a final solution. Risk assessment tool is a risk assessment, and a risk assessment is, as you know, a prediction of the future. But in my opinion, I think when I also saw the presentation from Susanne, is that much of the tools we use today is not good enough to predict person behavior or person's free will, and to understand that, because I don't like the matrices or the tables, because that is hard to read and understand. And what every tool miss, I think, is one important thing, and that is we have to communicate the uncertainty in the assessment, and also have to try to communicate what we don't know, or what the assessment group don't have the knowledge about. And this uncertainty is crucial to communicate up in the system, because they have also to know the uncertainty in the risk assessment. Yeah.
Indeed, very well, very helpful to get that input, and just thinking about dynamic security again. If we think of using dynamic security, how can we motivate or increase motivation for usage of dynamic security? How do you see that would be doable?
It's you have to understand. I think I have to accept that the dynamic circuit is not a method only used by a selected few members of the staff. It is a concept, I think, that invites the whole organization to be successful. It depends on management, understanding, and supporting staff in the daily work, especially in this context, I think. And I think establishing a good dynamic security is a concept that will affect the entire organization and have an impact on its values, its objectives, structure, and also methods, and be a part of an organizational culture to function good.
And on that, if we think of I mean, just following that line of thoughts, how do we see that this shift in approach and system? So how does that motivate inmates? How does it affect and motivate inmates?
It's a difficult question, but that again, I think it's a knowledge that everyone has, you and me also. Everybody have a need to be seen as an individual, and one way to do that is, of course, to conduct dynamic security by being present and interact with prisoners. It's as simple as that, but also as difficult as that.
Is Stephen coming in?
If I'm allowed, can I ask something, Robert?
Yes, you can.
Ole, thank you very much. This is very intriguing, and it's definitely not the last time we're going to discuss this. We're actually preparing a meeting for the RAN. Yeah, modern technology is horrible. We're actually preparing a small-scale meeting in a couple of weeks about this topic. But can you say something about the limitations or the benefits of dynamic security in high-risk units, and perhaps even with extremists? Because the problem with extremists and terrorists is that their basic idea is not getting rich. They hate the system, they hate the government, which is quite a challenge, I would say, if your approach is based on engaging, interacting. It could be the solution, but I think it could also be naive, or I'm just going to tease you. So how can this work with terrorists, violent terrorists?
Yes, first of all, I think dynamic security have to be conducted along with, of course, physical security and organizational security. And this crucial thing that both prisoners and staff have to feel safe is, of course, challenging in that situation you describe. But I think the more physical security we have, the more we will gain of having a dynamic security approach inside controlled environment. We have to interact and communicate with the extremist or the terrorist to try to understand and try to find risk and needs factors that can help us in the work of maybe establish a change in this person.
You're muted, Stephen.
Okay.
I was the first to talk while being muted. Thank you, Robert. I was thinking, Ole, this all sounds so like sound logic, like this is the normal thing to do. Why don't people do this? Does it cost too much money in terms of the But did you say the staff ratio? Is that the only reason people don't do this? Or are there also people who criticize the method and say this is naive and you're being too kind to people or whatever? So why don't we all do this in Europe?
This is the part. And how do we get understanding because we are working to prevent accident or situation to happen, and when they don't happen, nobody see what we have done. So that's why I stress that we have to communicate uncertainty. We have to communicate what we know what doesn't work, and we have to communicate what needs we have to achieve the goals in this. But I understand it is difficult to have politicians to see the benefit and to raise money for this group or prisons overall. This is not a popular issue in the political life.
Well, actually, if I think at the moment within Iran, we're trying to build a case that facing the specific challenges for extremists, false or non-compliance, they don't want to join the rehab programs, disengagement programs, not having enough information, knowledge, as you said, because these tools don't provide the assessment tools, the Vienna tools, etc. They're not sufficient to assess the risk and needs enough. I think those are the two main challenges, and the personal safety of the prison staff, because in many prisons, staff is being attacked by prisoners, by extremist prisoners. There might be a sort of solution, or it could be helping to gain our goals and get better at what we work. That's the challenge. That's the promise we want to find out. So we think there's a promise in it. We'll try and build a case, and well, we'll see if this can help the approach.
I also think what Susanne was talking about, multidisciplinary teams, is necessary to be in a unit management. I think maybe a solution is to create small units, especially for those who are in risk of being radicalized or are extremists. So yeah, we have to do good risk assessment and provide conditions that are suitable to have an impact on these kind of persons.
Well, yeah. Well, Ole, time is too short. We really appreciated all your valuable insights and information, and we hope to hear more from you further on to continue to share with us. So thank you very much for joining and for giving us all this input. And with this, we leave it back to Susanna to continue with the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Steiberg. It was a really interesting interview, putting also things in perspective, and I can build on what had been said also. And let me just express my gratitude to all the participants who are keeping up at this late hour. And I promise that I will really just share a couple of key points followed by recommendations, building on what we have also heard in the interview. So in this second session, 4 points will be addressed. If we can move on to the outline slide, the next one, yes. As Stephen also mentioned it a couple of times, the challenges of false compliance are really important in assessing re-engagement. I will say just a couple of things in point number 2 regarding the use of assessment tools, building on what has been said already. And the key point is the third one, challenges of information sharing and interagency collaboration. Something that has been very important and that came up in the RUN working groups meetings is how to prepare for a worst case scenario. And practitioners benefited a lot from a discussion regarding that. So I will share lessons learned from that. Moving on to our first point, challenges of false compliance are complex, and what I will highlight here is that it was around the year 2015 when French prison officers started to report a change in what they saw as signs of radicalization manifested among terrorist prisoners. What they have noticed that while earlier it was relatively easy to spot signs of radicalizations, they were explicit, they were overt. For example, prisoners openly rejected prison authority or refused to interact with others outside of their group. They might have celebrated terrorist attacks openly, and they showed very explicit signs that they were against the regime and that they were in favor of extremist groups. This change took place in the last decade, and what they saw is that terrorists who were non-compliant in retrospective were found to be keeping a very low profile, meaning that they tried to hide every sign of non-compliance and their real and true thoughts regarding authorities, regarding ideology. This means that it became much more difficult to identify signs of non-compliance. It also meant that they had to look for much more latent signs, for example, changes in the patterns of how they behavior. For example, when an inmate withdrew or started to talk barely minimal with his guards, or if their social contacts changed, they started to hang out with a different group or with different people, or in case of religiously motivated violent offenders, maybe their habits of prey have changed. What is important here is to realize that it is as also Professor Stageberg said, that it is not possible to control all aspects, and it is not possible to have a zero chance for reoffending. But for most offenders, we can say it is very difficult to sustain a lie for a long period of time. So this is why I cite here Rajan Basra and Peter Newman's very concrete recommendations to manage risks of false compliance, that is surveilling with the aim to find discrepancies between what an inmate tells to prison staff and to their fellow inmates. For example, this information can also be obtained by eavesdropping devices. So monitoring is very important, but then to look for, in data analysis, to look for discrepancies. As a second point, using multiple counselors and psychologists to make assessment and to see if they come to the same conclusion regarding the dangers and risks posed. As a third point, having an extended period of evaluation in a variety of contexts, starting in pre-trial all the way through right after trial, and then later on carrying out the evaluation constantly, patterns of change can be detected. Moving on to the topic of risk assessment tools, I really just would mention that practitioners report challenges with the length of it, and also the possibility to trick it. So there have been observations that inmates exchanged information between themselves about the content of it. They prepared they prepared answers for the questions, which made the assessment process more challenging. Also, the assessment tool is only as valuable as the staff who can take it, which means that staff needs to be specially trained in in using the tool, as well as in the dynamics of radicalization. So I would just maybe underlie the conclusion that we have to have realistic expectations, so decisions cannot be based on one assessment by one tool. We cannot expect that from a tool. Going on, the next slide. So what is recommended is to use assessment tools as one of multiple sources of assessment. We talked about the importance of training, and just building on what Professor Stageberg said, also that it cannot replace regular information assessment by sources who have ongoing personal relationship with the offender, namely the prison staff. So if it's integrated in dynamic security approach, then the information that's obtained can be used much more efficiently and effectively. Moving on to the next slide, to our third point. Practitioners have a lot of questions regarding how to create an efficient interagency collaboration. Before we look at the slide, I just would like to highlight and strengthen the importance that many of the successful reoffense cases involve some type of problem with information gathering and sharing and assessment. So an important security information gets lost within or between cooperating agencies, or it's not assessed correctly. That leads to the failure of prevention of the reoffense. So practitioners invest lots of energy and time to create good cooperation systems between them. The main questions center around how can different agencies create good collaboration if they have very different foci, for example, security versus integration. Oftentimes they have very different work cultures. Also, how we can balance the security and the privacy aspects of information sharing. And now I'm at point 4. How can we clarify roles and responsibilities between agencies? This is a key issue here. Point 5, who should have the oversight over the process? And number 6, how to create an effective case management process that can be used effectively with ease. Moving on to the recommendations, as I said, establishing consciously and effortfully an understanding about the roles and the responsibilities between the cooperating agencies, including also civil society organizations and other external partners, is very important. Secondly, establishing regular and clear channels of information flow and routines is key. And to be able to have one case manager that oversees all the information and who has the authority to take action if necessary, so that the information doesn't get lost. And the fourth point is more and more practitioners express that instead of having a top-down structure where periodic meetings are organized, let's shift to a more active and proactive, maybe even a daily cooperation regarding case management. These were the most important points, and so if we can move on to our inspiring practices, there have been considerable efforts regarding the creation of structures that aim to deal with violent offenders that are also sufficient to deal with extremist and radicalized offenders. And these are the 3 inspiring practices. There are, of course, more. The multi-agency public protection arrangements, the Aarhus model with the info houses in Denmark, and a relatively new model project launched by the German Federal Office for Migration and Refugees to have returnee coordinators for returnee foreign terrorist fighters and families in a German context. Due to the shortage of time, I will move on to the 4th and last point, which is very important to discuss. Although recidivism rates, as we discussed, are very low, the statistical chance is not 0. Therefore, organizations have to be prepared for a worst-case scenario. When a reoffense occurs, it may lead to tragic consequences. It is reported to have taken a toll on staff's emotional well-being. The high media pressure can be challenging, and sometimes even the legitimacy of a direct program may be also questioned. So for this reason, let's move on to what can we do and how can we prepare. Let's verbalize some recommendations. Regarding preparation, it is important that an organization prepares crisis management protocols where a plan is thought through in what happens if our client reoffenses. and it has to, or it is advised to have a crisis communication plan, where it is laid out how can we and what can we communicate in the media, for example. And an important point for practitioners was formulated when they said support the supporters. So oftentimes severe reoffense cases take a really big emotional toll on staff. It is important to provide individual resources, psychosocial support for them, to have the means and the resources to provide this to them, and also to process what happened on a collective level with supervision and with extensive debrief. Moving on to our last slide. Also, an even more proactive approach is recommended before anything, any crisis happens. Firstly, before the crisis takes place, create and nurture positive relations with expert journalists who are in the field. Feed them with information about your work. Have and nurture a positive relationship with them. Secondly, educate stakeholders about your organization's work so that they know and understand what you do. And finally, employ an independent body to evaluate your organization's work and outcomes. With this, you can also see the strengths, and also you have the chance to work on weaknesses, and you can have this document as this evaluation as a point of reference in the time of crisis, and you can also show your accomplishments. With this, I would like to thank you for your attention, and maybe just strengthening what we have talked with also with Professor Stagerberg in the interview. Most or a lot of the practitioners share this sentiment that there is a shift on too much reliance on tools and technology in surveillance. And probation is about human relations, so a shift towards a more dynamic security approach could also increase our chances to reduce re-engagement. Thank you so much.
I am now unmuted. Thank you, Susanna, for your excellent presentation. It's quite an achievement to condense in 2 short presentations this large library of practices and lessons that Robert Rell, for instance, took from all the practitioners that he assembled. For the time's sake, I'm moving over to the chat. We have a reaction. The only thing is I can read it in 2 ways. Lars Schaefer says, how much approach, I think it's a question for Ole Stakenberg, how much your approach of dynamic security has to be radical? So how radical has this to be to bring your values and attitudes forward on a scale from 1 to 10? So I'm actually reading this, how radical do you have to be on a scale of 1 to 10, or how much can you achieve in terms of values and attitudes? Lars, would you be able to unmute yourself so I understand your question? No technique allows you to do so. Is Lars still around? Yes, he's still around. Is Lars able to unmute his microphone? Can we see this? If not, Ole, are you still around? Can you turn on your camera? Don't tell me Ole left. I can't find him. Oh, there he is. Ole, how do you read this question?
I tried to understand it also.
Is there such a thing as a radical approach to dynamic security? Does that make sense?
No, it doesn't make sense. It's no level of dynamic security. Dynamic security is something you conduct and organize the units for. So
there's Lars. Let's wait. Let's see. Lars, can you try and rephrase your question in another sentence? So, thanks for posing a question.
We don't seem to be able to hear you, Lars.
Doesn't seem muted. Looking at the yes, I hear you. No, I'm afraid we're going to answer. We're going to see if you want to make a change in values and attitudes of prisoners. This is how I read the question. How much DS dynamic security do you have to approach, or is this something that you could refer to, Ole?
No, as I said, I think everything is about interaction and to be present in the environment where the inmate is, because every meeting you gather information and understanding about this person that will help you do better risk assessment and do better measurements afterwards. And I think the crucial thing also is to create arenas in the prisons to share knowledge, and also have training how to share knowledge, because this is also a challenge for someone, because you have to have arenas where you can discuss your gut feeling, so to speak, not only come with information, but also share gut feeling and discuss them, and also share what you actually don't know, if you understand.
Yep, excellent. I think you answered Lars' question. I hope you did. We can't ask him. I don't see any other regarding to convince politicians, communities to invest in this approach. Oh, there it is. There was something on the bottom of my screen. So how do we convince? Well, I think you said something about it. There's this so-called theory of change approach, where you say, based on evidence we have, based on the practitioner evidence, on research, this is the concept we're working on. And if you're listening to the challenges that Susanna brought forward, those are the things that are difficult problems at the moment for this specific target group. I think everyone more or less agrees or understands that dynamic security is definitely not harming the compliance, the knowledge, and other elements that we're actually trying to be better at. And we need to find out, I guess, and then talk to practitioners and have it researched, like Susanna was suggesting, to find out whether or not this approach actually benefited or supported what we try to achieve. I'm going to wrap up all of this. First of all, Ole, thank you for stepping in and sharing your expertise. Very interesting. I'm already convinced. And then I will go to Robert. Keep up your good work as an expert in the RAN, and most of all, being an excellent working group leader, assembling all kinds of excellent practitioners and traveling all over the world to share their experience and getting better. And then Susanna, of course, the last one. Thank you for your 2 presentations. We will share them with the, if you say yes, we're going to share them with the organizers. And then, like Susanna said, also on behalf of my colleagues, Jaron and Max, who organize this behind screens, thank you for all the practitioners who were at the Monday at 6:06 are still around. That's the dedication that we love. Thank you for staying here. Thank you for listening to us. Keep up the good work, stay safe, and well, be good to everyone you meet. Thank you, and bye-bye. Tschüss.